Hello, these are my week 4 notes. I'm a little late getting these out, but I've had headaches that just don't want to go away because that's my life today. You will find the Word document under the week 4 questions thread labeled My Notes, okay? So always talk about the objectives first. Let's talk about Chapter 21. So Chapter 21, we're going to start with anatomy and physiology. Anatomy is the study of the structure or form of an organism and its parts. Think of what everything looks like. Think about it's more of like a laboratory kind of idea. Physiology is the study of the function of an organism's structural equipment. For example, the anatomist might study the arrangement of blood vessels near the surface of the skin, whereas the physiologist might study how those blood vessels dilate in response to a sudden rise in temperature, how stuff reacts. This is more real world. And we'll think about these in a homeostasis organisms sort of way, right? There are some checkpoints. So, tissues. So remember, we already covered organelles that led to cells, and now we're getting into tissues. We did a little of this before, but not so much. So tissue is an integrated group of similar cells that performs a specific function. The cells composing a tissue are specialized, and they have an overall structure that enables them to perform a specific task. So a bunch of cells that want to do the same thing yet and get together make a tissue. Tissues get together and make organs. Types of tissues, there's a great YouTube video. Skin tissue is called an epithelial tissue on the outside of the body, and it also lines all your organs. Connective tissue looks like a weird spider web. This is the structure of connective tissue is correlated to its function. It binds and supports other tissues, right? Connective, it connects the suckers. Adipose tissue, scroll up a little bit. It stores fat in closely packed cells in a sparse matrix of fibers. It looks like Skittles, and there's a good link for you to see. Blood is a connective tissue consisting of red and white blood cells suspended in a liquid matrix called plasma. You might remember this when we talked about blood donation. Have we talked about blood donation yet? No, we haven't. You will get to this when we talk about blood donation this week. Remember blood from earlier. You get cookies for blood, that kind of stuff. And then here's a link. Fibrous connective tissues. This is kind of like cartilage, or is cartilage. Let's talk about cartilage. Cartilage is found at the end of bones and forms the shock-absorbing pads that cushion the bony vertebrae of the spinal column. Remember, we talked about this when we talked about animals and how they evolved. Cartilage has no blood vessels, so injuries to it tend to heal very slowly. Bone is a rigid connective tissue with a matrix of collagen fibers hardened with deposits of calcium salts. This combination makes bone hard without being brittle. Remember that birds have hollow bones because it makes them lighter, so it's easier to fly. And here's the nice ThinkQuest website. Let's look at muscle tissue. Oh, muscle tissue has 3 kinds. There's skeletal muscle, cardiac/heart muscle, and smooth muscle. There's a great link to help you with this. Skeletal muscle is attached to bones by tendons and is responsible for voluntary movements such as walking and talking. Weight training does not increase the number of muscle cells, but instead enlarges those that are already present. This is really good to see with a video or pictures of it, just because it gives you that visual aid that, you know, would take up way too much space if I did in this Word document. So check it out. Cardiac muscle, also striated, so think of steak lines. It is found only in the heart tissue, always has to function. So this is something that isn't voluntary, because then you'd have to think about your heart beating. Smooth muscle is named for its lack of obvious striations, found in the walls of organs as the intestines, the blood vessels. Smooth muscle is involuntary and looks like, to me, a flowing river when you see a slide of it. So it's very smooth. And so it's going to basically be in all your walls, and yet another involuntary. So you got 2 that you don't think about, 1 that you do. Let's go down to nervous tissues. Nervous tissue is found in the brain and spinal cord, as well as in the nerves that connect them to all the other parts of the body. The basic unit of nervous tissue is the neuron, or the nerve cell. With their long extensions, neurons can transmit electrical signals very rapidly over short distances. Here's a nice little video. So let's go up higher to organ systems, right? Organ systems are teams of organs that work together to perform vital body functions, circulatory, lymphatic, nice little link. So think about how our organelles work together to get our cell to work. Our cells work together to get our tissues to work. Our tissues work together to get an organ. And now the organs are working together to get an organ system. And ultimately this would go, organ systems work together to create a human or an organism. Organisms work together to make a population. Populations work together to make an ecosystem. So it's all building blocks on top of each other. Nice little checkpoint. Every organism is an open system, meaning that it continuously exchanges chemicals and energy with its surroundings. In fact, organisms must do so to survive. You eat, breathe, defecate, urinate, sweat, radiate heat. All examples of how you operate as an open system. Would the Earth itself be considered as an open system? Just something to think about. Do we emit things into space? Interstitial fluid fills the spaces between the cells and exchanges nutrients and waste with microscopic blood vessels. So this is what the sea that our cells float in, the liquid. Okay. Homeostasis. This is a big one for this week, right? Homeostasis literally means steady state. It's a tendency to maintain a relatively constant conditions in an internal environment, even when the extreme environment changes. So it's hot or cold, but our body temperature remains the same. Kind of the opposite of Newton's laws, where an object in motion tends to stay in motion. Homeostasis is saying that to survive, we have to maintain a steady state, or the stuff inside us is going to mess up. So we have to maintain that steady state. And we have all these ways to do that. One way, most mechanisms of homeostasis depend on the principle of negative feedback, a form of regulation which results in a process to inhibit the same process. So think of negative dog training. So I'm going to yell at this, the kid, the dog, the whatever, to make it stop doing what it is. Positive feedback, in which the results of the process intensify the same process. So positive training, oh, you did a really good job, you got an A, so now I'm going to take you out to dinner. Or the dog did what it's supposed to do, now it gets a lot of praise or a treat. And there's a video on it. Another checkpoint. I'm enjoying ignoring the checkpoints. I'll let you read those. There's in the book. The maintenance of the internal body temperature is important to animals. This homeostatic mechanism is called thermoregulation. So why is that important? Why do critters need to have a constant internal temperature? Something to think about. Fever. So an abnormally high internal temperature is when the body-wide response that usually indicates an ongoing fight against infection. A fever makes the body hot and kills off disease, but if it's too hot, it can kill off the organism. So we can have enough control of how our internal body is to kill off stuff if we need to, right? What about osmoregulation? This is the control of the gain or loss of water in dissolved solutes. So would this be more important for land animals or water animals to maintain this? Fresh salt, think about who we're talking about, who might really find this useful. Some of the salts are table salt and Cl. Osmoregulation is based largely on regulating solutes because water follows the movement of solutes by osmosis. Remember those hyper and hypotonic cells? We got to keep them stable, right? Osmosis occurs whenever two solutions separated by a permeable membrane differ in their total solute concentrations. There is always a net movement of water from the solution with the lower concentration to the one with the higher solute concentration. So what's next? Most marine invertebrates, you finally get into the critters, such as lobsters, scallops, and jellies, are osmoconformers, right? Meaning that their internal and external environments have a similar solute concentration. Osmoconformers do not need special mechanisms to prevent a net gain or loss of water. In contrast, all freshwater animals and most of the marine vertebrates are osmoregulators. They must actively regulate water loss and gain. Which one do you think evolved first? Could be interesting. Look it up. Post as participation. Urinary system gets rid of waste products from the cells, right? So that's the whole thing. So now, that was a nice, fast chapter 21. I was like, what chapter were we doing? Go through it, make sure you read it, and constantly in your brain, especially with the week 5 projects, that's what our blah blah blah, our discussion question is about, right? Is the homeostasis of a critter who lives in your week 5 topic area. So think about this. How do you keep your body alive when the environment around you is constantly changing? How are these organ systems put into place? How are these organs, how are these tissues allowing you to thrive in your environment? That's what you want to keep in your brain, because that's what we care about in this very general view of biology. Okay, thank you, and I hope this